I've never seen my wife. I'll never see my kids. I don't make that statement lightly. But to know that I can take what I've been through and help other people with it, it gives it new meaning, and it gives meaning to the work that I do. Because then all of a sudden, what you do isn't a job. It's a reason for being on the planet. For me, it's the reason I went blind.
So Chad, man, it's awesome having you here at LeaderPass Studios, and super excited about what we just did, where we filmed your first major training program, but super powerful stuff, man, based on blind ambition, and also honored to have you on the LeaderPass platform and be able to deliver it that way for you. So
absolutely.
So welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Jamie. It was fun. Had a good time.
Yeah, you did a great job. You've accomplished a ton, and I was really thinking about this conversation and how, you've really inspired countless people with your story, with your success. But I want to start before the success, and I want you to take us back to really when you first found out about your life was going to have a pretty dramatic change, and I'd love to know what you were thinking, and I'd love to know how you decided to confront that.
Yeah, it was pretty awful. I was in college, and I'd been told growing up that at some point I could lose my eyesight, but I honestly never prepared because I could see okay. I could, drive a car, I could play sports, do a lot of things. I couldn't see well at night, but my vision wasn't getting any worse, and I was pretty okay with the way things were going. And so I just sort of lived under this delusional thinking that it wouldn't happen to me. And then in college, it did. It happened to me. I was 21 years old. I was studying for a literature test, reading some assignment, and it happened. I realized that was the moment. Everything was coming to a screeching halt. Everything that the doctors had been warning me about my entire life was coming to fruition.
And what do you mean warning you? Like that was
like you could go blind. There's a chance that you could lose your eyesight.
Because of genetics or because of your...
Yeah, it's an inherited eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa. And so my parents, neither of them are symptomatic. So come to find out, I was later genetically tested, and they found out that I have a mutated LRAT gene, which is science speak for this particular strand of retinitis pigmentosa is autosomal recessive, which means you have to have two bad copies of that gene to express it, which is why neither of my parents express it. They can both see fine. My brother sees fine. Nobody in my family that we know of had this problem. But obviously, my parents were carriers, and with them both being carriers, there was a 25% chance I would express it, and there was a 75% chance my brother would not. And so it happened to me. I realized this is it. They had been warning me about it. I couldn't see to complete that assignment, and I'm not going to lie to you, it was a really, really tough day for me because I realized that all my hopes and dreams, everything I wanted to be when I grew up, I wanted to go into the medical field because I wanted to help other people. And at that moment, I wasn't even sure if I'd be able to help myself. So it was a pretty dark moment. No pun intended. It was dark, physically and metaphorically speaking, of course. But it was pretty tough, sitting in there and realizing that my new reality, was this. I had to mourn the death of my imagined future self because, I didn't want to be a blind guy. That's not what I dreamt of when I was growing up, and so had to pivot, had to figure out what I was going to do. And it took me some time to come to terms with it. For a long time, I sat around just kind of feeling sorry for myself, but I realized that wasn't going to get me where I needed to go. Nobody was going to come and save me. I had to save myself. I had to take ownership of my situation. I wasn't responsible for my circumstances, but I knew that I had to be accountable, for my situation, for my life, and for my outcomes.
So really, you were young. You were 21.
Yep.
And at that age, I'm trying to think, 21, where your head is, single guy, ambition, ready to rock.
Yeah.
How was your thought process? And when you confronted that ownership idea that you just said, where'd you get that from? Like how'd that occur to you?
Well, my dad had told me growing up one-on-one, like, hey, there are good people out there. but everybody's got their own problems that they're dealing with. And your problem of poor eyesight, going blind, kind of gets lost in the shuffle. People, one on one, people will care whether or not you can see, but they're all dealing with their own things.
Mhm.
You got to figure out how to deal with this. Nobody really, when it boils down to it, nobody's going to come save you. One on one, people care, but in the mass of humanity, it gets lost in the shuffle. Everybody's got their own things that they're dealing with, and so logically speaking, like the logical part of my brain kicked in, and I realized it wasn't going to change things. I could sit around and feel sorry for myself for the rest of my life, but it wouldn't make my life any better.
Mm.
And so I could sit around and I could feel sorry for myself for the rest of my life, 50, 60 years. But all that would do would ruin the next 50 or 60 years. I'd be miserable. And so I just chose to take a different path. In my life, I decided at that moment to adopt a new philosophy in my life. And, I decided that for me, excuses are for losers. And I
Mm.
just decided that I wasn't going to sit around and make excuses for not getting to my goals. I wanted to instead use my energy, my effort, and my determination to find a path forward instead of just staying stuck in that victim mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you jumped right into, career-wise, what'd you end up doing right out of college? Were you and I know you've got some tech experience and in your world, but
Yep.
talk about what you did, after school.
So my first job was with a technology consulting company called Anderson Consulting, now known as Accenture.
Mhm.
And so I was hired there to do consulting work for our clients, the tech space. I did everything from financial consulting, marketing consulting, HIPAA, writing code, things like that. I was there where I taught myself how to write code to engineer my software so that I could do my job more effectively. The screen reading technology that I needed to use didn't work with everything out of the box.
Okay.
So I had to learn how to write code just so that I could submit my time, for example. So I was a consultant and we had all these different project codes that we would use,
Mhm.
different client projects that we're working on. And you had to track how many hours are assigned to each project code. And we had a little spreadsheet like application, but it wasn't a true spreadsheet. It was, built to work like a spreadsheet,
Mhm.
but the software didn't work with it. So the only way I could submit my time and get paid was to figure out how to use this timesheet application. And so I got the book of how to, kind of a how-to guide to write code to engineer this software, and I just started playing around with it. Next thing I know, I was writing applications, and several years later, I was writing code to make Oracle's applications work with screen readers that literally Oracle didn't think was possible. They were going around telling everybody that it couldn't be done, but I was at the time the only person in the world who was able to do it. And I was later asked to testify in a court case on that behalf. But it was one of those things. I knew that the only way I was going to be able to really be effective in my job was not to have to rely on somebody else to come in and make things work. I needed to be the technologist myself so that I could make sure that it worked, so that I could do my job most effectively.
Yep. And then from there, you, essentially, now I want people to understand what you do today, a little bit about your book. But when you come out of that situation and you're hitting things head on like you did,
Hmm.
learning how to write code, which is fascinating, it's really amazing, and then even doing something that others said you couldn't do, seems to be your theme, man. I mean, it seems to be part of who you are.
Well, it's motivating to hear that it can't be done for me personally. I actually like when people doubt me and say that it's not possible because that's fun. Trying to do something that other people think is not possible. That's what inspires me to do the hard work. I don't want to really work real hard and try and achieve the ordinary. That's just not very motivating. So I went from the technology space, ended up going into the commercial mainstream, I was doing initially market intelligence and then financial modeling for these large commercial outsourcing deals. So think multi-billion-dollar technology deals with big companies like Zurich or Textron or
Mhm.
Sears. And so I worked on the modeling and the pricing of those deals, ended up shifting into the federal space where I was doing the same thing for large government programs. So think three-letter agencies, whether that's the Transportation Security Administration or the NSA or the CIA. And
Hmm.
so working on the price to win and pricing strategy for those big deals and obviously building all the models associated with that. And my job when I was a senior director of pricing strategy and solutions was to integrate a pre-sales strategy that I came up with, and then a point of sale strategy, and then a post-sales execution strategy, so that we could win the work and then we could be profitable with the work in a hyper-competitive environment for multi-billion-dollar deal with some pretty lean gross margin numbers. And so it was my job to build that strategy, to get our partner companies on board with it, to get all the executives on board with it, sell it, and then to help the program manager be successful with it. So that was what I did for a day job for quite some time, and I was successful with it. And they asked me what they could do for me. And for some crazy reason, I asked them to write a six-figure check and send me to Harvard. And so they did. Some crazier reason, they agreed, and they sent me to Harvard Business School, where it was there that I learned with the likes of Bill George, who was our teacher for the Authentic Leadership course. And so for those who don't know Bill George, he's the former chairman and CEO of Medtronic, one of the world's largest medical supply companies. He's now an executive fellow there at Harvard Business School, and he teaches the True North leadership framework. And it's all about finding things in your life that affected you at a visceral level, an emotional level. You know, where do you have trauma at some of the more formidable moments of your life? And how do you take that and then repurpose that into your work?
Hmm.
And so for me, it was kind of obvious. I looked at my situation. Well, I've never done anything with the fact that I went blind. I was always just hustling, trying to get to my next goal, but I'd never really looked at how I could repurpose that in service of other people. And there were some other people in my class who were looking at theirs, and some of them had challenges. There was one guy in our class, Greg. He had lost his mom when he was younger because they couldn't find the right oncologist for her. She was battling cancer, and they couldn't get the right oncologist. And so his purpose, his why, was creating a company called Trusted Doctor that connected cancer patients with the right oncologist using a video platform. And so that's one example of taking a moment of trauma in your life and repurposing it in service of other people. And for me, when I started getting comfortable with this idea, when I wrote Blind Ambition and when I started giving keynote speeches all over the world, and people would come to me and tell me how I've affected them in a meaningful way, it gave new life, new value to what I'd been through. And in some bizarre sort of way, it made going blind worth it. And now bear in mind, I've never seen my wife. I'll never see my kids. I don't make that statement lightly. But to know that I can take what I've been through and help other people with it, it gives it new meaning, and it gives meaning to the work that I do. And that's what Bill George talks about with True North. It's linking what you do on a day-to-day basis, either through your profession or through volunteer efforts or through your hobbies, to something that connects with you at this deep emotional level. Because then all of a sudden, what you do isn't a job. It's a reason for being on the planet. For me, it's the reason I went blind, and it's really gratifying work. I feel really fortunate to be able to do it.
That is awesome. And you do that full-time now? You're a full-time professional speaker.
Correct.
And
Yep.
you travel around. I know we've talked about some of the places you've been, and
Yeah.
the demand is obviously huge to have a guy like you come in.
Yep.
And
Yep.
your message though is resilience. I mean, that's kind of the it embodies you, but that's the
Yeah.
premise of what you're teaching.
Yeah, I'm teaching the anatomy of resilience. Absolutely. So I'm
Okay.
teaching you the recipe that I used to emerge from my victim mentality of blindness to figuring out how not only can I bounce back okay, but better off than before.
Hmm.
How could I experience post-traumatic growth? Which that's what happened to me. I'm happier now, and I'm more successful now than when I could see.
Hmm.
And so what I want to do through the keynote speaking, through this training course, through the book, is help you uncover that formula for you so that you can achieve more than you thought. And so that's what I like to do, is break that down for folks so that it's not quite as mysterious. You know, there are a lot of people out there who talk about the need to be more resilient. They'll talk about, you know, what resilience is. And sometimes, to me at least, it can tend to sound like platitudes, like, you know, try harder, don't give up. And all those things are great, but they're all byproducts of having a resilient mindset. You know, when you have the formula for resilient thinking, for shifting your mindset, you will try harder and you won't give up. But it's not from a rah-rah thing that I say. It's from the way that you learn to attach yourself to your circumstances that gives you the motivation from inside of you, because the meaning is coming from inside of you.
Can you describe a time where you had to be or had to live that resilience that had nothing to do with your blindness?
So my first job out of college, I was with Anderson Consulting, Accenture, and it was post 9/11. and they started going through a series of layoffs, and I was part of that. I don't know what wave it was, 5, 6, 7. I got caught up in that,
Mhm.
and I had to figure out what I was going to do next. I just bought a home. I had a mortgage. I didn't have a ton of experience. I'd been in the workforce for all of 8 months.
Hmm.
I was blind, living in a city I didn't know. Couldn't really get around as well as I'd like to have because I don't drive, obviously.
Mhm.
People out there will be glad to know that. But I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I took a job. I got a job with a state agency to hold me over and pay my mortgage and scrape by. I realized it wasn't where I wanted to be. It wasn't where my passion or where my heart was,
Mhm.
but it was enough for me to hold things over until I found something that I thought was more aligned with where I wanted to go in my career. And I was at that state agency for 6 months until I did find a job with a boutique consulting firm in the Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. And so ended up moving there. My then fiance and I, who's I'm now married to, Evie, we moved to DC for me to take this job, and she quit her job, and we were kind of resetting and trying to figure out what we were, how we were going to start all over. And so we were there in DC just rolling in there for this job. And in hindsight, it was a little bit crazy, right? You look at it on paper now, 20 something years removed, it probably didn't make a ton of sense on paper,
Mhm.
but it worked out pretty well because it was there that I started building my career in tech. Went from writing code for this boutique software company to shifting into the market intelligence, and then got the job doing the pricing of those large deals. And my career just continued to blossom from there. And in hindsight, it was absolutely the right thing to do, and it led to so much growth for me and for my career and for our relationship and in
Mhm.
many different ways. So it was the right thing to do. But you look back and go, it all makes perfect sense now. But then at that moment in time, it was kind of fuzzy. And so I think a lot of it is just figuring out, okay, I don't have all the answers right here in front of me right now, but what is that next best action
Mhm.
that I can take? And for me at that moment, that was the next best action because I knew that that job that I accepted in Northern Virginia may not have been exactly what I wanted to do, but it was a step in the right direction.
And is that a part of when you talk about your formula for resilience, the anatomy of resilience, is that one of the components that you teach? In other words, what you use there, I think you said next best action. Is that part of what you teach?
Yeah, it is. It's part of when you're dealing with uncertainty and not really, not being intimidated by your circumstances. A lot of times when I talk about having a vision of greatness for yourself, that's one of the main pillars is visualizing greatness. And sometimes you have to do that even in unfavorable circumstances.
Mhm.
And a lot of times you've got that vision of greatness, but sometimes that vision of greatness is so bold and so inspiring that it can be scary. It can prevent you from taking action. So when you're looking at that big scary goal, it can intimidate you from taking action. But
Mhm.
what you have to do is zoom in on the next best action. And so instead of focusing on the big scary goal, which can be intimidating, it's zooming in on the next best thing that you need to do in pursuit of that.
Mhm. And it reminds me of just some of the stories you've told me since we've been able to meet. And you've had some interesting, what I would associate with not somebody who's blind,
Mhm.
adventures, several
Few.
adventures that
Yeah.
are by choice too.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that because I think at one point you said, "Hey, I rode a camel. I jumped out of an airplane."
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, "Wait, slow down, man. Tell me,
Yeah.
tell me about that."
I don't know. There are a lot of people, blind people or sighted people, who just opt to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. But we did that when we were in Dubai. I was giving a keynote there
Hmm.
in Dubai for a large software client, and my wife and I were there, and we decided, you know what, we've always wanted to go skydiving. She really wanted to do it over Palm Island,
Yep.
in the desert of Dubai. I was like, you know what, why not? And ironically, she's not the one who downhill skis like I do. I'm a pretty aggressive downhill skier now. She's a little more timid, but when it came to skydiving, she was all in and gung ho. And I was the one who was nervous about it. I was nervous, and I'm told you can see it on my face in the video.
Yep.
And for good reason. I was pretty nervous. I realized that this is really about to happen. I'm going up in this plane.
Hmm.
I'm not coming back down in the plane. That's not going to happen. And I was the first person to jump. And you're getting up there and you're getting ready to jump out of the door, and you realize it's okay. One of two things is going to happen. Hopefully, the parachute opens and everything goes well. And,
That's what everybody's concerned is, of
yeah,
course.
yeah.
Yep, yep,
And it was fun. You jump out and it feels like you're being shot out of a cannon.
yep.
And it's this huge adrenaline rush for a little while. But ironically, after, I don't know, 10 or 20 seconds of free fall, even though you're still going at 120 miles per hour, this peace kind of sits in on you. And you start to feel this sense of peace. But then when the chute deploys, you feel a bit more peace. When that chute does open, you're like, okay, I'm actually going to be landing today. That's a good thing. Today's not my day. But yeah, I do that. I like to push the envelope a little bit because I realize that getting comfortable with uncomfortable things is where we experience growth. It's the adventure of life, and it's the only way that you can continue to grow as a person. You can find new and creative ways of innovating, in your career and in yourself. And it's getting comfortable with that experimentation. So whether that's jumping out of an airplane, whether that's riding a camel for the first time in the desert of Dubai, whether that's training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or competing in tournaments or downhill skiing without being able to see, I like to push the envelope a little bit just to continue to grow and continue to be uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because when you talked about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this is like something that you take very seriously. It's an important part of your life.
Yeah, this isn't just something that I do. It's part of who I am. I do take it seriously. Every day that I am not traveling, I train. On days that they're closed, I train. I have one of the black belts come to the house and we'll do sessions there because it's so much more than just a fighting system. A lot of people think that, oh, it's a martial art, it's a fighting system. It's a whole lot more than that. It's a way of being. It teaches you how to face your fears, that fear is not the enemy. Instead of moving away from fear, actually the direction of travel should be towards the fear because growth is on the other side of the fear. And so it helps you understand that, whenever something feels uncomfortable, whenever it feels scary, it's pointing you in a direction of growth. And so if you're fighting on the mat and you're dealing with an opponent and you're scared, well, you probably are tense and your adrenaline is spiking and you're breathing heavily and you're not going to be that effective. But if you can learn to calm yourself down, to breathe normally and to bring your heart rate down and to not let your adrenaline spike and to just stay relaxed and look for a way out, a lot of times you'll find a way out, but you won't if you're all tensed and panicked and just, not really thinking clearly. And so that's helpful, whether or not you're fighting somebody on the mat or training or just dealing with something in your personal life or something's going on at work. Maybe something at work feels like it has you in a chokehold. But if you learn to get comfortable with discomfort, your comfort zone expands and you learn how to deal with those situations with calm and being relaxed and finding new and creative ways of getting out of a bad spot. And so it teaches you that. It teaches you that success doesn't happen overnight, contrary to the instant gratification culture that we live in with overnight shipping and viral video sensations and all those things. It teaches you that great things are built with consistency, with effort, with dedication, with respect for the people around you, with humility, not being so ego driven that you can't put your pride aside in pursuit of learning, because learning is the thing that eventually leads to winning. So there's so many things that come out from it. And, we've got the kids, our daughter and son both train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu too, because I think kids more than anybody in today's age need to learn those values, that it is hard work, it is commitment, it happens slowly over time, but once you build that over time, nobody can ever take that away from you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've heard you talk about your kids. Let's talk about your family real quick. You
Sure.
and Evie been married for how many years now?
Be 23 this year.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And you've got 3 kids, 3 children?
Two
2 children.
Yep. 16-year-old Juliana.
I think we saw one earlier today.
Yeah.
I think we got her
Jules
on
is
camera.
here.
Yep.
Jackson's at home. He's 8.
Cool.
And we got Major the superhero guide dog. But
yeah, he is amazing. He is
he's
amazing.
cute, man.
Yeah,
He's cute.
That is awesome. Let's talk about Blind Ambition and this program that you've created, the training program, the heart behind it, and then what your hope is, like where you see this really making an impact for individuals, companies, organizations that, may love to have you as a speaker, of course, and we encourage that, but also this is an opportunity for you to really go deep with them in some ways.
It is, yeah. You get on stage, you get 45, 60, maybe 90 minutes, and a keynote is designed for content, but for entertainment. And it's hard to really cover as much content as I'd like to cover. I've got the book, 55,000 words there. Not everybody's geared to sit down and read a book. And so this really allows me to go quite a bit deeper than I could ever go on a main stage at a conference. And it allows me to reach people who could never make it to that conference. And that's a really important thing, because you go to a conference, you talk to, I don't know, 500, 1,000, 5,000 people. A lot of times, those people in the audience have family members who want to hear the message.
Mm.
They have a husband or a wife or a son or a daughter or colleagues that couldn't make the conference for whatever reason. And those people should hear the message too. And they want to hear the message. And this allows me to reach those people no matter where they are, at their computer, on their phone, wherever they may be. They can still access the content and learn how to develop that resilience in their own lives.
Yep. And that having those as micro lessons to that point, when you're teaching, you're a great teacher. You're great on camera. We enjoyed working with you. And I think the only thing I would advise is not to do 2 hours of squats before you come next time, because you're standing when you said that. I thought we're losing about halfway through the day, but you actually left with some energy. I mean, you did.
I did. I don't know that I would have been very good if I'd gone to jiu-jitsu that day.
No.
I was pretty spent by the time we was about 10 hours of,
Yeah.
but I knew that, again, part of my formula for my best self, and I talk about this in the class, in the lesson, the program, is knowing the formula for your best self. And for me, a big part of it is getting my sweat in. And so I got up early that day before we came in, and I did a bunch of heavy squats, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Towards the end of the day, it felt a little questionable, I'm not gonna lie to you, but I knew I would roll in with energy if I'd done that. It would get my blood going, it would get my energy up. I just wondered, how long am I going to have to stand to do this? May have to get a stool by the end of the day, but thankfully I managed to make it through.
I think a combo of thinking about that, and then Major, your dog, was in the corner of the rug off camera, and a couple of times, all of a sudden, like a dog would do, just rolled over and made the yawn sound, and I was like, "Is that his stomach? Is he need food?" No, he was ready to go, which was a blast. But that lesson, that formula, you keep talking about the formula from Blind Ambition. Give a taste of a lesson that you see when you are with people, when you're around folks, either on stage or individually, as you consult, is a big impact for them.
Well, I think one of the most important lessons that people can learn is how to tell themselves the right stories. And they need to learn how to tell themselves the right stories about themselves and about the circumstances that they find themselves in. A lot of times something happens in life. Maybe it's a medical diagnosis like mine, going blind. Maybe it's something at work. Maybe it's a merger, an acquisition, a divestiture, a reorganization. Maybe it's something with the family. Something happened with a loved one, and you're trying to figure out how to process that and how to navigate that. And a lot of times we kind of beat ourselves because we start telling ourselves negative stories about the circumstances. As humans, we don't always stop and step back and contemplate ways that this might actually work for us instead of against us. We just know that this wasn't part of my plan, and so I don't like it. And we don't really stop to contemplate, well, what if this happened to me for some positive reason? And I talk about that through my lens of going blind. I could have sat around and just told myself negative stories for the rest of my life about poor me. This happened to me because I've got bad luck. But I chose a different story of how I could use it to empower other people and help them bounce back from their own setbacks better off than before. And that became my story. And so we all become our stories. And so as an individual, it's really important for you to learn how to create a better narrative about the circumstances that you find yourself in. But as leaders too, it's really important to help your team create better narratives about changes and disruptions that are going on in the company and out in the marketplace so that they can emerge better off than before. They don't have to default to their own internal narratives, but you can help get out in front of those changes, in front of those disruptions, and help everybody create a better narrative that reframes the challenge that you're facing into an opportunity so that people can navigate it with more persistence, in a more productive way, and with more grit and success.
Yeah, that perspective's huge. I mean, that's a learning how to tell those stories. You even talked about like repurposing your trauma a minute ago. And so
yeah, it's the meaning we attach.
Yeah.
It's Friedrich Nietzsche who said, "He who has the why to live can bear almost anyhow." And so once you find the why did this happen to me? You know, when I first went blind, Jamie, I was sitting around, I was asking myself, why me? And I had that tone. Why me? This is unfair. Life's not fair. And I had the question, it's a valid question to ask, but I asked it with the tone of a victim. Over time, I learned to ask the same question, but all I did was shift my tone. I opened up my mind to being curious. Why did this happen to me? I wonder if there's anything positive that can come out of it. And over time, that curious tone started to identify some things that can come out of it that were positive. And now here we are today. Now I believe that I'm a better person because I went blind, not in spite of it. You know, it helped me become a better version of me. None of that would have happened had I not gone through that struggle.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I love that perspective. And it makes me think of, you've drawn inspiration from others, obviously. I mean, you've quoted books, you've quoted people
Yep.
since I've been around you, speakers, people that have really influenced you.
Yep.
And that's perspective, and that is their story and how they look at their life, or how they choose to frame it, I guess is the
Mhm.
way that you put that.
Yeah.
If you could think of someone right now that you could borrow their perspective for a day, and this could be sighted or unsighted person, who would that be? If you think through all the books and all the people you've been around, and
Gosh, I'm stuck between athletes and presidents, to be honest. If I went down the athlete path, I'd probably have to choose Michael Jordan
okay.
because I've never seen a more dominant force in sports
Hmm.
than MJ was back in his day. Back then, I could see. So I remember those highlight reels of just how he owned the court, just what it took for him. Because I don't think, he wasn't growing up, he wasn't the most talented person. He didn't have all the success in the world out of high school.
Hmm.
I don't even think he was a starter at first when he was in college. It was his work ethic,
Hmm.
his grit, his determination that allowed him to become, the greatest basketball player to have ever lived. So I would love to just sit down with him and man, that'd be great to pick his brain or to have his perspective, like you said, but to really get a peek into his mind, how he created that kind of dominant work ethic and those kinds of results on the court would be fantastic.
Hmm. Hmm. You talk about your parents earlier, and they didn't have the same situation physically that you have.
Yeah.
But I think about your family. I think about your kids, your wife, friends, people that know you and love you. How do you think they would describe your journey, um, compared to how you do? Because your perspective, once again, was so
Mhm.
powerful. How do you think they would describe it?
It's funny, when I was growing up, my parents, they used to say, "Gosh, you're so hard-headed. You're so hard-headed. It's hard to tell you anything. You're so." And then I went blind and became successful, and they're like, "Wow, you're so determined." I was like, "That's better marketing. Thank you. You got a better marketing team with the message." Same exact thing, right?
Yep.
Just better marketing spin on it. I think they'd probably look at my journey and say, uh, he had a lot of stuff thrown at him. Honestly, they would probably think it's harder than I would say it was.
Mm.
And maybe some of that is some protective thinking on my part. Because if I were to sit back and really admit how hard my life has been, how hard my life is compared to other people, it would be overwhelming. Because it has been hard. But you know, I'm to the point now where, yeah, the early years were a lot harder. Now it's kind of easy.
Mhm.
But getting here certainly wasn't easy. It was overcoming all that victim mentality that was suffocating me early on. But I think their lens of it would be that it was harder than what I recall it to be.
When you think about how you're using resilience now, I mean, you've got this amazing perspective, you've got this formula, you've got conversations with some really interesting people, I'm sure,
Oh yeah.
that you interact with, and
Yeah.
you're on these stages all over the world. When you think about how you still use that, is there anything recently, because we described stuff in your past, obviously having to manage your day to day, but can you think of something recently that was a use, how you've used that resilience personally?
I use it every day. It's controlling the narrative in my head. Even it's muscle memory to me at this point, but we get curveballs. Curveballs happen all the time. Whether it's the holidays didn't go as planned, or something happens on the road, or it, all these things that they continue to pop up. It's easy to say it, it's harder to live it.
Mhm.
And it's easier for me to live it than it is a lot of people, but it still comes back on me too. I still have to remind myself of those pillars, and take a step back and write it down. Even that really helps me to make things more concrete, is to step back and take a situation and take a breath and write things down.
From here, like if you think about where you're headed, you're a vision guy, right? You've got
Yeah.
this you're creating the life that you want to build and helping others do the same thing.
Yep.
Where are things heading? I mean, where's the next challenge for you? I mean, you've already done the dune buggy riding on the desert to,
Yeah. Yeah.
where do you see, even aside from the adventure side, where do you see this heading for you?
Well, the adventure side, more of that, certainly, and we've got some hella skiing that we'll be doing in the backcountry of the Rockies coming up. That'll be fun. I've never jumped out of a helicopter to go skiing
Wow.
before.
Hmm.
That'll be fun. Uh, Professionally, really excited about the class here.
Hmm.
Really excited about the impact that it will create. I think beyond that, I've learned a lot about building blind ambition. And I think, if I look down the road 5 years, maybe I do a few less speaking engagements. Yeah, I'll probably do 60 or 70
Hmm.
this year. I did 50 this last year. I might gear it down a little bit. I'm thinking of how to help small, mid-sized businesses build their brands too, because I've learned a lot about brand building, marketing, and so forth in the process of building my company. And I think that's probably the next logical step, is to create a marketing company in the next few years to help other people bring their messages to market, whether that's speaking or otherwise, but really helping folks understand what it takes to build that brand and bring it to market.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, the word legacy is thrown around a lot. How would you like or what would you imagine and hope that your legacy would be, even beyond the success we've talked about? How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to be thought of legacy wise?
I guess I'd like to be thought of as someone who symbolized and challenged and helped, pushed and pulled other people to redefine what's possible in their own lives.
Hmm.
Because I think that so many people out there are they're leaving potential on the table. You know, you are capable of more than you give yourself credit for. I don't know what you give yourself credit for, but I can promise you're capable of more, because I'm capable of more. And I give myself a lot of credit. I used to give myself very little credit. And over time, I've learned that I wasn't giving myself enough credit. And that's true for everybody. That's true for you. You can unlock more in your life, more of what you want from your life: happiness, purpose, meaning, success, whatever, however you define success, doesn't matter. The point is, we all limit ourselves by our thinking. We all have self limiting beliefs that prevent us from living our best lives, from unlocking our full potential. And what I hope more than anything is that I can help people live their best life and reach their full potential and realize that they too can redefine what's possible in their lives.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, I'm watching and hearing, and I cannot wait to see what happens from here in that legacy that you're building and creating, which is obviously serving others, which is true about who you are. I've enjoyed getting to know you
Likewise,
as
man.
well.
Thank
And
you.
for people that want to find you and learn more about you, where would you suggest they go?
Go to my website, chadefoster.com. From there, we have lots of videos. There's links to the book. There'll be a link to this LeaderPass class there too. There's blog articles, press, all the programs, social media handles, everything's there. It's got everything there that folks would need.
So if
So,
they want to book you or if they want to
yep,
have you
all
come to
that's
speak,
there.
everything's there. Perfect.
Everything's there. It's chadefoster.com.
All right, great. Well, looking forward to doing more with you. And once again, it's been a pleasure having you here. So thanks for
Thanks,
joining
Jamie.
us.
Appreciate it, man.
All right, up high. We're going to do a high five.
Yep.
I like
All right. I didn't miss.
No,
Beautiful.
That's great, man. That was great.